Welcome to Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast, where we meet experts from all walks of life to learn their intrinsic motivation so that they can share it with the world. What do we have in store today? Stay tuned to find out more.
Okay.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody out there in podcast land. You are in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza.
And I am David.
And today, really excited to speak with our guests. It is Football Sunday, and for most people that are interested in Football Sunday, we like to keep score. We like to see, who's winning, who's losing, the win column, the loss column. And many people that watch sports kind of do that in life as well. What is the win column, the loss column? And today our guest is the author of The Round of Life. He's talking about 3 reasons to give your life a scorecard. And so we're going to look at how our guest talks about how we can keep score. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Should it be a combination of some sorts? Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Andre Hu to the podcast. Welcome, Andre.
Oh, hi, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here on a Sunday. We've already established that the candle burns on both ends when it can, and so we try to make the time to speak with our guests anytime possible. So we're glad you can make it.
I appreciate you guys making the time for me. I'm really excited to be here.
Sure. So, when we talk about sports, and I'm a big sports fan, David's a big sports fan, and it is Sunday, the day after Championship Saturday. So for those that watch college sports, it was a bunch of scores that determined if people were going to move on to the playoffs or not, or their particular bowl. So, here in the States, there are a lot of times that we keep score. And I wanted to talk a little bit about your background and what gave you the impetus to even write a book about keeping a scorecard.
Yeah, my background is actually a physical therapist. Worked for about 20 years in that industry. Got a little burnt out, and it was during that same period where I was playing a round of golf with my buddies, and one of those days where I just made a decision to just focus on enjoying the round. And I was more observant of how my playing partners were handling their round and the adversities they were facing. And the thought just occurred to me, the metaphor to life. We come upon all sorts of hazards and adversities and challenges in our lives, and how do we each respond to that? And as I saw them going from bunker to bunker and struggling just to get in the fairway, get off the tee box, the thought just occurred to me, hey, we all keep score. We're so focused on our score. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And the thought just evolved eventually into the thought of writing my book, my life story, because I've been through quite an eventful life, and it was something I wanted to share, the lessons and insights that I've gained from it, and also for my children, to leave a legacy behind for them, the lessons that I wanted to put down on paper for them that I may not be able to later. So it just evolved into the 2 passions for me, golf and parenting, and and life, and just pursuing my passion of always wanting to write a book for myself, get published. And so I combine all those 3 into one concept, and voila, the concept of The Round of Your Life came about. It's basically a story of my life using golf as a metaphor to share it.
I love it. And as a self-professed capital S as in slicer, I will say that it's really funny. Right before the podcast started, I was talking about when I was in the corporate world, we had to take a lot of clients out, and you do dinner, you do a lot of golfing. And early on, I learned the hard way of keeping score, where I was so competitive that I actually beat some clients, and our business was negatively affected. So, so
should have spiked a bit more that time, huh?
Yes, it was, and I blame it on Will Ferrell because he said, "If you're not first, you're last," and so I kept that as a credo. So for all the type A's out there, obviously I'm bringing some levity, but I thought I'd share that with you.
Yeah, I can totally relate to being a slicer too, though.
I do want to ask you because, with golf, there is that saying, and I did learn that more so in the business world, that you really know more about a person by the way that they play golf because, like you said, it is an individual sport. You see how they're handling the challenges and the triumphs and the headaches. And so I'd like for you to talk a little bit about, were you able to look into maybe friends, colleagues, business partners by playing golf with them?
Oh, sure, yeah. There's a quote, I think by P.G. Wodehouse. It's in my book. It's called, the saying goes, to find a man's true character, play golf with him. And there's been times where, I've seen playing partners use the foot wedge quite liberally. and you can kind of just gain a sense that if they're doing that on the golf course, they're going to do that in life as well. And it just something about that just makes you kind of just lose a little bit of sense of trust for his lack of integrity there. Now, if it's something you all agree to ahead of time, hey, just take a free drop there and you all agree to it, that's not a big deal. But in a true golf environment and you see a guy cutting corners and cheating, breaking the rules like that, then you just know it's a guy that you might not be able to trust in real life. And also just their character and their demeanor. If they take the game so seriously, then you wonder how other aspects of their lives they might be affected by just issues that aren't revealed there that's affecting every aspect of their life. And so, you can definitely tell a lot by a man's character by playing golf with him, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I do want to begrudgingly give a shout-out to the older men and women out there because when I was younger and, strapping young man, if you will, and I used to play baseball a lot, so I had a terrible golf swing because it was a baseball swing. And there were a ton of people that were in my age group, and we could never understand why the older people were doing so well, and it wasn't really a strength thing. So it really was a trigger for me when you said that enjoying the round, you got more out of your golf game.
For sure. I guess it ties back to the concept of keeping score, what you mentioned earlier. I do qualify it in the intro part of my book that the only reason why anyone should keep score is the perspective of their own potential and not use it as something to compare themselves to how other people were doing. Because if you do that, you're just setting yourself up for endless misery, because there's always going to be people better than you, and there's always going to be someone that you're better than. But to get to really, the true reason to keep score is to really compare yourself to your own potential in life. And so I do qualify that in the early parts of my book. And back to what you were saying about the three reasons why a person might want to keep score. It's because if you're not keeping score, you kind of don't get the proper perspective sometimes. You might play a full round of golf, and at the end you think you did really poorly, but then you look back and you look at the score, and it was better than what you thought. Because you might have had a better day putting than you realized, or you had a lot of saves off the green. So that helps to get perspective by keeping score. So that's one of the main reasons why I encourage everybody to keep score.
Absolutely. And let's stay with some metaphors here of life with sports and keeping score. So, again, this is going to be another begrudging acknowledgement, but as a as a Gator blood breathing everything fan, I do have to acknowledge and give a shout out to the quarterback of the Alabama yesterday, where I think the metaphor of keeping score is a perfect metaphor for his life, in that he was the head quarterback. He's gotten SEC accolades in his earlier career, and then he was replaced, by another one. Like as you said some people are better and some people are not, and he actually sat on the bench for the whole year. And a lot of the experts felt, with his skill set, that he would have left and try, like LeBron, take his talents to elsewhere, to Miami, what have you, and he did not. And it is a total story of how he, rose from the ashes to actually beat Georgia yesterday. I'd like to get your take on that.
Well, my wife went to Alabama, and so yeah, I know, right? And I went to Ole Miss, so once a year we always a weekend where we're not talking to each other. But for the most part, every other game I do find myself trying really hard to pull for her team. But regarding that Alabama quarterback, Jalen Hurts, I mean, I'm just so impressed by him, and just his calm, cool demeanor, and how he just never gave up, and he just hung in there and just stayed with the team when he could have transferred and gotten out. And it was just so ironic, just the way things unfolded there, where he pretty much repaid the favor. Last year he was struggling, and the other freshman quarterback came in and saved the championship for him. And this year, the other guy was injured, and he came in and saved pretty much a chance for Alabama to go to the championship playoffs. So, just his demeanor and just the way he was able to kind of, I think he probably took a step back and got perspective of things, and that's what helped him through this whole trial here with the whole season, and being a good teammate, and I'm just so impressed with him. And even after the victory, it wasn't all about him. If you can see by his reaction, it was pretty much about his team and his teammates, and even the other quarterback came up and congratulated him. So it showed real nice class between the two. Good sportsmanship, and I was so impressed by that. But so yes, it's kind of hard to bring up an Alabama win, but
well, let's say that since I do live here in Georgia. I like living here and all that good stuff. So I will extend a little olive branch in that for the past 2 years they were ahead of Alabama. Right, like if you're the king of the mountain, of course everyone wants to beat Alabama. But in each instance for the past 2 years, Georgia was ahead, and they couldn't sustain that lead. So I'm sure if we're continuing with the metaphor that they're keeping score, what would you suggest to those guys that were so close to kissing the sun and got burned?
Well, that's a great question. As far as keeping score on. For a single, what I would say is, keeping score for a single game versus keeping score for an overall round of life. Lots of times you have a bad hole where you quadruple or worse score on a hole, but lots of people let one bad hole take them down for the rest of the day, or for the rest of, just for an extended period of time. And the same thing there with the Georgia game. They came so close and they lost the game, but if they lose perspective that, hey, it's a long journey and it's just not just one game, then it might affect them into the next game, for example, because I don't think they're still fully out of the playoff the way they played. And so that's the metaphor that I would apply to the full round. Lots of times you wake up and, for me, let's say my kids are having a rough time getting out of bed and it's just a rough morning, and I can allow those little moments to affect the rest of my day, and say, oh, man, I got off to a bogey start, and just continue to spiral my round downhill and let that bad start affect the rest of my day. But if I keep perspective and say, hey, it's a long round. I have 18 holes to play. It's a long day. I have lots of opportunities left to turn it around and not just let one bad start affect that. Then I can get proper perspective and really turn my day around and just refocus. And I think that's the same metaphor in response to your question about how they can apply that to help overcome this defeat. And I mean, it's a gut-wrenching defeat for sure. But unless you really keep focus of the overall big picture perspective that, hey, they're still not out of it yet. They played well. Sure, they made mistakes, but I think hopefully they'll get another opportunity. So that's how I would encourage those guys to apply that metaphor to that game.
Sure. And the other game afterwards, and I'm a big fan of Ohio State just because their coach was the Gators coach before he went to Ohio State.
Yeah,
and
Urban Meyer.
Urban Meyer, and when you're keeping score, they lost one game, and they've won back-to-back championship conference games, just like Alabama. So the argument is should they be considered? And they're obviously keeping score of we should still be at the dance. I mean, that quarterback. If he doesn't win the Heisman Trophy after last night's game, 500 points and 500 yards in passing, all these are scores that I guess, especially as men, that we use to merit worth.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Is that you can really use the scorecard to your advantage or disadvantage based on your perspective. And that's one of the points in my book where, if I apply the scoring concept of the round of my life, the metaphor, I am right now 47 years old. So I am in the early parts of my 11th hole. The concept of my book is I break down a person's lifespan. The current average lifespan in the United States is about 80 years old. So the first 40 years I break into the front 9, and the last 40 years I break it up into the back 9. And just based on that system, I just finished my 10th hole. I'm on my 11th hole. And for most people, they can look at it as a midlife crisis, if they have a negative perspective and say, wow, my life is more than half over if you take the 80 years as an average lifespan. And they get into a panic, if you will, and say, wow, what have I done with my life? And it's almost over. And all these negative midlife crisis-inducing thoughts. But on the flip side, if you take it with a more optimistic perspective and say, wow, I still have almost half a round left or more to do something and turn things around and not let the front 9 define me and who I am on my scorecard. And so just the attitude, if you will, and the thoughts that you use to either empower you or limit you can really make a big difference on how you perform for the rest of your round. And that's one of the main reasons why I encourage people to keep a scorecard, because number one, it gives them proper perspective and insight. Unless you go through each and every hole and give yourself a scorecard, you really don't know how well or how poorly you've done. And if you don't know where you've been and how you've performed, it's hard to form a game plan moving forward and say, hey, what have I done well? What's gone right? What good choices have I made so that I can continue to make more of those good choices versus, hey, where have I gone wrong? What bad decisions have I made? And is there a common theme that I keep that keeps recurring, the same type of bad choices, bad decisions in life, so that I can avoid making more of those decisions and bad choices for the remaining part of my round? And so that's one of the helpful things with keeping a scorecard. It gives you that kind of 40,000 sky view perspective of your life and your round. And once you can break it down in that manner, hole by hole, again, you can kind of see where your strengths and weaknesses are and look back and gain some personal lessons for yourself that you can apply and say, hey, this is a lesson I learned, so I don't make the same mistake again, or this is another lesson I learned that, hey, this is what I need to continue doing, keep focusing on to really to make the most of my remaining round. And so the third reason why you want to keep it scorecard is that by applying the first two steps there that I just mentioned, it gives you a chance to come up with a strategy to really make the most of the rest of your round. So that's a powerful way to really view your life, if you will, using the scorecard method that I propose in my book.
And since you are a golfer, I mean, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the greatest comeback this year with Tiger winning a major. And
oh, yes.
After many years of being counted out, it fits into your three reasons as to, you had your glory, you had your pinnacle, you had your valley, and now you're back in the pinnacle again. What would you say as far, I want to get your take on the whole Tiger situation, but the other part of that is, how are you able to get out of that bunker when, you're using all your strokes and you just can't get out of that bunker of life?
A great question. My view on Tiger, I know that Tiger is a very polarizing figure. You either really hate him or you really like him. I haven't met many people that are in between. But regardless of where they stand on the Tiger issue, I think one thing that you cannot deny is his resilience, and his mental strength in overcoming all sorts of adversities in his life. And as someone that that I describe in my book, as someone that's overcome so many personal obstacles and adversities in my life as well, I can totally relate and appreciate what Tiger's been through. And moreover, with my background as a physical therapist and dealing with patients that's gone through back surgeries, much less, one back surgery, much less two or three that Tiger's been through, I personally wrote him off, and I said, he's done. His career is done. There's no way, because I've seen patients just struggle just to get out of bed and just struggle to walk, much less swing a golf club. And for him to not just swing, but swing at a high level enough to compete, and not just compete, but to win, it's just the most impressive thing that I've ever seen in my life, from a physical and mental combination standpoint. And so that's why I said on Tiger, I just really appreciate the journey that he's been through and the struggles that he's faced, and still be able to come out on top. I don't think many people can really appreciate and understand what it's like to live in such a public domain like that, where every little aspect of your life is open to the public and scrutinized and analyzed, and that's, I can't relate to what that is like, but I can just understand, just appreciate how tough that must be, because as golfers, we go out in the tee box and just standing in front of three of our partners, how much pressure and how difficult that can be just to get that first swing off the tee box and hit the fairway with that. Much less a whole gallery of people, much less millions of people on TV watching, and much less, all sorts of commentators ready to just jump on you, to beat you down and break down your swing and criticize you. So that's just so impressive with Tiger. As far as the second part of your question with, when you're going from bunker to bunker and how to get out of it, one thing that I've learned is just focus on the next step. There was this story that I came across recently about this guy who really had almost like no arms and no legs. I forgot his name, but he was able to climb Mount Everest, and that was, and it's just so impressive. And the story of how he did it, when he was close to top and he was ready to give up, he just changed his focus and just focused on, hey, can I take the next step? And once he took that next step, he focused on, hey, okay, can I take the next step after that? Just focus on the step that's immediately in front of you. And so recently, I got back into I hate running, but as part of this program that I'm going through, I resumed running. And at the end of my run, when I was about ready to give up, I said, man, that's all I can do. I give up. I just thought about that guy's story. I wish I remembered his name. But the sidewalk that I was running on, it had, it had little segments of squares, and so I just focused on the next square of concrete and say, surely I have enough energy and strength and endurance to run that next square. And once I made that next square, I focused on the next square, and then the next square, and then the next square. Instead of looking so far ahead, and you see, I was overwhelming. I still got like another mile to go to reach my goal, and it's overwhelming. But if I just focus on just that next square, then I can do it. So same thing with the bunker. Don't worry so much about the overall score and how it's damaging to your scorecard. If you focus on that, then you lose sight of what you need to do to execute that next shot. So when you're in the bunker, just focus on, hey, okay, what do I need to do? Head down, feet stable, hit through the sand, and just get the ball up on there, and just focus on that next shot that you got to execute. So that would be my advice. So if you're struggling with going through a whole bunch of adversities in your life, I would just say, hey, what's the next thing that I got to do to just keep going? Whether it's the next meal I have to prepare, the next assignment I have to finish, or simply, hey, I just got to get out of bed. And then after that, hey, let's just finish brushing my teeth. And then next, let's just take a shower. Let's just get dressed. Just focus on that task at hand, one step at a time. And before you know it, you'll have a series of consecutive wins that can build momentum and help get you to turn your whole day, whole life around, pretty much, if you just take that mindset. So that's what I would encourage people.
Now, my second part of that question is some levity, because I think it's a national campaign. So I'd like to talk about the Dr. Pepper commercial, and that, the guy, he injured his wrist and he can no longer grill. And so the coach tells him, you gotta pick a new career. You can't grill anymore. And he's like, "What? I've grilled my whole life. What do I do?" And many, of course, of levity, but a lot of people are in those situations linearly where they maybe studied to be a doctor their whole life, and now they're at these crossroads because, I understand taking that next step, but that next step was going to lead me to being a doctor, and now that's off the table. I can't be a doctor anymore in this example. So what would you say to someone going through something like that?
That's a great question. I would say always be flexible as well. If let's say, just that same example where a guy has set all his goals and all his dreams on being a doctor, and it turns out that he didn't score high enough on his MCAT, or doesn't have the grades or the other parts of his resume to be competitive to get into medical school. To be flexible and realize that, hey, things happen for a reason. It might be a blessing in disguise. And most times, more often than not, I found that to be the case. The worst things that can happen to you can be the best thing to happen to you in your life. For me personally, one of the worst things to ever happen to me in my life that affected me was being abused by my stepfather. It just did a lot of damage to me growing up. It just killed my self-esteem, self-worth, significance. I just felt unimportant. But now looking back, that turned out to be one of the biggest blessings in my life, because now having 3 young children who are currently ages 6, 7, and 9, one of my biggest passions in life is to be the best parent I can be to them. And I know without a doubt in my heart that I would not be the type of parent I am to them today, because I'm so proud of the connection and the relationship I have with them, because I've been so passionate in reading up and acquiring as many parenting skills and tools that I can to be the best parent I can be. I would not be that type of parent and would not have had that type of drive were it not for the abuse that I endured and suffered when I was young. And so that's what I would say to people who've gone through that lots of times when your dreams and goals are sidetracked, it may seem like the most damaging, crushing thing to happen to you at that time. But you just really have to trust that lots of times in life, those type of moments can be a blessing in disguise. It can really lead to gifts later on if you just allow yourself to step back, take a big perspective of things. And again, that's where keeping a scorecard can help.
Well said. Andre, let me ask you this. So everything that you just said, how much, I read some of the story of, your family and the circumstances when leaving Vietnam, and God, it's just hard to imagine, especially living here in the United States where we're kind of spoiled. We are just spoiled with everything. But, and you were what, 3 years old when?
3, yes.
Yeah. Do you remember any of that? The leaving and being at sea for 10 days and all that?
Now, most of that time period, the stories from that time period are from my mother. Listening to her and recording her stories. I did an interview with her about 3 Christmases ago when she was in the hospital, and just really asked her about that time period because I was too young to recall. And I encourage people to do that too. If you're lucky enough to have a parent who's still alive, sit down and just make time to interview them about their life, their past. And maybe the time period when you were so young that you don't have enough memories. Maybe they'll tell you stories about you and other family members that siblings that you might have not ever gotten a chance to hear from them unless you really make an effort to sit down and just record it also, because that's a gift that you can share for your children later on. And the reason why I bring that up is my mother just passed away last week. We buried her last week. And it made me appreciate so much more the fact that I did do this, because now I have something I can go back on and just play that interview that I had with her and just listen to her stories. It's just something that's just so priceless and so invaluable, and something that I can share with my children later on as well. And so, again, if you are fortunate enough to have a parent still alive, be sure to do that and just get a camcorder or a phone and just record that interview with them. It might take a few minutes for them to just settle down and get comfortable. Once they get going, the stories will start coming out, and you'll get really priceless memories from that. I'm not sure if I answered your question on that or if I got off on a tangent. But
it's great. And I was kind of leading to, I just imagine your life, just thinking about what your mom went through and your other relatives, and that decision to get in a little boat and shrimping boat or whatever, and leaving in the middle of the night and not knowing what was going to happen. I imagine in your lifetime that's kind of fueled you in ways of like, look, I'm not going to complain about this or that. This is the strength they had to be able to do this with so much uncertainty. I mean, how many people are just going to go out and just, get into a boat and onto the ocean, and you just have no idea we could all just perish. Maybe it works out. I mean, I can't even imagine those some kind of circumstances and the strength to say, you know what, this is what we got to do, and we just got to do it.
I appreciate you guys giving me a chance to speak about that period of my life, and especially about my mother, because if people read my book, they'll understand how much I went through personally. But as rough as my life has been, my mother's life has probably been 1,000 times rougher. But yet, here's a lady that, like you said, she struggled when the minute from about 10 years old on, living in a third world country in Vietnam there, war torn. They had to leave their part of their hometown there in North Vietnam at the time because the communists were taking over, and so their whole family picked up and moved south to get away from the regime of the communists. And then when the war escalated, she lost her first husband, who was my father. And so that time period enough can be traumatic on a person. And like you said, to pick up again after that a few years later and leave the whole country behind and put all your hopes and dreams into a new country that you don't even know the language. You can't speak English, and you don't have any vocational skills even to make a living for yourself. And so to go from that and then remarrying another man who ended up being so abusive to her and to me and to her children, and then on top of that, they eventually put all this is not in the book, but they put all their savings into a shrimp boat, only to lose it in a storm because they didn't have the funds to buy insurance on it. And so they lost all their life savings on that. And then a few years later, working so hard, I mean, this is probably 115-pound lady who was lifting 100-pound boxes of shrimp, when they opened up their seafood store in Alabama there. And she worked so hard, and then they rebuilt their life back up, and they were able to be successful with their seafood business, only to lose it all again when their home was invaded by an intruder, shot my stepfather, and paralyzed her for life. And just imagine going through all that, but that's only half the story. The other half is she lost a daughter crossing the street when she was 12 and got hit and killed by a car, and she had to take her off life support, because she was brain dead, declared brain dead by the doctors. And then losing another daughter through when a drunk driver hit and killed her daughter there, and then losing it all again in Hurricane Katrina. I mean, she's been through enough to last several lifetimes, but yet she always had an optimistic outlook on life. And if I can share real quick, the three things that I really felt helped her endure all those events and tragedies in her life and still have such a positive outlook, and you never saw her complaining about her fate in life. The first was her faith. She had such a strong faith in God that the more difficult her life got, the more she turned to God for her answers. The second was hope. She never lost hope. Even when she was paralyzed 5, 10, 15 years later, she still had hope that she could one day walk again. Any possibilities of going for any type of treatment, whether it be acupuncture or chiropractic or some sort of new therapy, we always supported her on that because she never lost hope, and we never wanted to take that hope away from her. And so that hope kept her going. And the third is love. I mean, she had so much love for God, so much love for her family, so much love for others, even strangers that she kept praying for who were going through tough times. And I think those three things that really helped her overcome all these obstacles in her life. And she's a role model for me. She is someone I look up to, and whenever I have a bad day, I just say, hey, if my mom can be in a wheelchair and still be happy and still find a way to just have a fulfilled life and a positive outlook and attitude, then there's no reason why I can't overcome whatever issues I'm having for that day as well. So I encourage every single person out there to keep that in mind. She's just an inspiration for me.
Yeah, well said.
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry for your loss, too. Man.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. But, when she died pretty suddenly of an aneurysm last week, and it was a blessing in that she didn't have to suffer, and it's a blessing in that she was prepared. She was ready to go. She told us for years, hey, if the Lord is ready to take me, I'm ready to go at any time. And so knowing how much pain and suffering that she's been through, I was at peace knowing that, hey, she no longer has to suffer, even though she never complained about it. But I knew deep inside that, it was still crushing for her to overcome all those deaths and all those losses in her life and still be confined to a wheelchair, but yet willpower to fight and be independent in her life and still make the most of it by just sharing and spreading love to all those around her. and that's just so inspirational. So I was at peace. Yes, I was at peace with her death, and I know she's in a better place. So it's a blessing, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, you never know what we're going to cover in intrinsic motivation from a homie's perspective, man. So
you guys have an amazing podcast. I've listened to some of your previous episodes, and I appreciate it. So, yeah, I appreciate this opportunity as well. So I appreciate you guys.
Sure. And just a few more questions. We're not done yet. But I do want to ask, I want to get your opinion on there's this TV show with, he's a comedian, subject to entertainer. It's called The Neighbors. And in The Neighbors, or The Neighborhood or something, they grew up, this was the neighborhood that they knew, and then they have these new people move in, and they're making lighthearted about the subject of gentrification, where your identity changes, or the identity of a community changes. And I want to get your opinion of, you didn't know it, but speaking with your mom and knowing about the mother country in Vietnam, and then fast forward to 2018, where it's more of a vacation, it's the destination for tourism. And so it's totally different today, but maybe the identity of the mother country isn't the same as it once was. I wanted to get your take on that.
Well, I've had a chance to go back twice. The first time was shortly after high school, and to visit my grandmother. The second time was a few years later, after she died. So, of course, I don't have any memories of the country when I was young, but the first time I went back, it was such a contrast, because going to my grandmother's village, you can still see a lot of it was kind of like a third world type of environment. Not much electricity. There were no working flushable toilets, if you will. Of course, my grandmother was blessed enough to have some of my aunt and uncles actually build a home that did have some of those things. But for the most part, the rest of her neighbors did not have that luxury. And then you walk only about a mile down the road, and here's this luxurious golf resort, 5-star hotel, and it's such a contrast. I hadn't picked up golf at the time, but I could still appreciate just the luxurious greenness of the course, and the high-rise hotels and the palm trees, and it's such a beautiful country. And they, it is a positive. All the tourism aspects of it are being developed there, so to really bring out the natural beauty of the country. But at the same time, you walk a mile down and you just see the contrast of the third world country, and that's one of the things that I would struggle with probably if I were to go back there and play an actual round on a course there, because a lot of the caddies there are female caddies, and these are caddies probably making, gosh, I don't even know how much, but nothing, compared to other people, but they might make maybe $100 a month total, if you will. And these are caddies that you are required to use on the course. And so here you are paying $100 a round to people who are making $100 a month. And they're, these are girls carrying, small girls. Most of these Vietnamese girls are petite. They're like barely 100 pounds, and they're carrying your heavy golf bags around. And I would struggle playing around on a luxurious course like that. That's something that I'm not sure I can do. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, you have to look at the exploitation, and you're like, well, if as an outsider, they don't even understand how the situation is, which kind of leads me to my next question. I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast Family Ghosts.
No.
Okay, so it's a really cool podcast on iTunes or your other podcast directories. I'm sure you can find it, and it's more. This is a question more so to keeping score. So in the Family Ghost, there's, a number of episodes, but the one that comes to mind in speaking with you, there's this lady or young, I don't know, she's in her late 20s, early 30s. She's Vietnamese. She's speaking with her mother, and it was kind of, you were talking about contract, and she was raised here. I think she was even born here in the States. And the mother, as far as keeping scores, she wanted to have a better life for her in the States, but her daughter didn't have any ties to her ancestry, or her mother was trying to get her to experience going to the mall and things like that we take for granted here, but also have some reverence for home. And so there's something about second generation people that come here, immigrants, second generation immigrants, where they no longer have any ties to their ancestry. And with keeping score, I wanted to get a take with you for that subject matter, as far as with your kids 6, 7, and 9. Is there outreach to, of course, these are the great things here in Houston and the United States, but you should also know about your history.
Yes, and I do notice that trend as well, that a lot of the younger generation children who are born here don't have that same level of appreciation for what their parents went through and the sacrifices that they made to give them the opportunities that they have in this great country that we live in. And that's something that I've put great thought to. And so some of the things that I did growing up, for my children when they were young, was to make sure we hired a nanny that spoke only Vietnamese, so that they can learn and become more fluent in our, in Vietnamese, in my native tongue, if you will. And one of the things that we're continuing to do is, in fact, my wife and 3 children are there right now as we speak. Every Sunday from 9 to 12, they drive almost a half hour away to go to a Vietnamese school so that they can retain the language, how to read, write, and speak the language. Even though they were exposed to it when they were young with our nanny and my parents and my mom and her parents coming to visit and staying with us frequently so that they can speak and interact in Vietnamese, it's still hard for them to get naturally, because English, for some reason, is an easier language to communicate in. In fact, my wife and I, when we communicate, it's mostly in English, even though we're both fluent in Vietnamese, but we can convey our thoughts a lot easier, more clarity in English and Vietnamese for some reason. So we struggle with that ourselves, so we understand, but at the same time, we're really making a conscious effort to help our children retain parts of our culture that we feel are very important to retain. The 9-year-old daughter does struggle with that, where she doesn't enjoy going to the school and the class as much as the younger 2. So we try to find extrinsic ways to motivate her to go. But that is certainly a struggle for a lot of the parents my age who are having younger children that are born here. We do plan a trip to go back to the country in Vietnam, probably within the next year or 2, and I think that will help. But I'm not sure I have the perfect answer to that. I just know that having a family environment where you expose them to aunts, uncles, grandparents who speak the language and have the food and celebrate the cultural traditions like the Chinese New Year, and all the traditional the traditions that are unique to your culture. I think that's important as well for them to take pride in that, and that's one way to help retain that, I think. But at the same time, also help them to celebrate and embrace that, hey, this is part of your identity as well, is American culture, being American, being an American, to embrace all the wonderful, unique strengths and benefits that this great country has to offer as well. That's something to celebrate and embrace, and be proud of as well. So to have that balance I think is can be a source of strength, if you will, like the round of your life. It depends on how you choose to look at things and the twist that you put on it, whether you see it as a strength or a weakness. And we try to focus and make it a positive. Say, hey, embrace both parts of your culture, for both have positive benefits that can really enrich your life. So that's the message that we try to give to our kids.
Andre, is your wife, is she from Vietnam too?
She is. She's from Vietnam. She came here when she was 7, so a little bit later than I did. So she had a little bit of memory back then, but still not much. So, but yes, she is of Vietnamese descent as well.
Okay.
So that's something that we have in common. We can we share the same culture, same language. We enjoy the same foods. And that's a big.
What is the correct pronunciation? Is it pho or fa?
Fa. It's fa.
Fa?
Yes, and in fact, that's what the plan is for lunch for today. Fa.
You can never go wrong with having fa. Oh my goodness.
That's right. It's, especially on a cold day, right? It warms the soul.
Absolutely.
It's like Vietnamese soul food.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's I dated a Vietnamese girl, and we did reflexology, and then after that we'd have pho. So it was like a perfect day.
And that does sound like a pretty cool ideal day there.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Go ahead.
Go. I was going to ask you about the pho. Are you because there's 2 types of pho eaters, right? Mm-hmm. There's one that no matter where they go, which pho restaurant, the minute their hot bowl of pho comes out, they're grabbing the hoisin sauce and the sriracha and they're pouring it on. And then the second type, right?
Yes. I know where you're going with this one.
The second type is kind of where I'm at, where, hey, I just taste the broth first. And if it's perfect, if it's perfect and it's, then I don't need to add anything else to it, and I just savor it and just enjoy it. It's like pouring what do you call it? A1 and Heinz 57 on a steak, right? People are saying,
right,
that's sin. You shouldn't do that, right? Because you're taking away the full flavor of the steak. And so that's which one are you?
I'm more of a broth person first. So,
okay.
yeah, I've gone through the newbie where I'm like, just trying to throw everything on there, and I didn't enjoy it as much.
Yeah, but see, you've got a little bit more refined experience of eating pho too now then, right?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I have a technology question for you as far as keeping score, and I'm kind of pausing how I ask this question because technology changes so quickly. So 10 years ago, we didn't have the issues we had today. And I'm thinking with your kids 6, 7, and 9, 10 years from now, it may be a totally different conversation. But when you're looking at keeping score, usually with teenagers, but you see some adults that are keeping score with social media. And so they're usually influenced by depression if they're not getting enough interaction, likes, shares, or they feel elated. So it's kind of that dopamine and adrenaline is superficial. And wanted to get your take on people that are tethered to their technology as far as keeping score and how healthy or unhealthy that is.
Yeah, great question. My approach to my children as far as social media goes, I go by this concept of time. For a child, love is about time, T-I-M-E. And so I make time to actively engage with them in ways that don't involve technology as much as possible. We're playing board games all the time. We're outside riding our bikes, playing on the playground, and just lots of different ways to interact with them where it doesn't involve social media. They're too young for all the Facebook and other things, but the school assignments, lots of their school assignments do require them to get on some of these apps to do their assignments. And so probably the extent of what they do, how much device time that they do have. There are a couple of games that they like because some of their friends like it, and we're very careful to screen to make sure that it doesn't include violence and those other.
You're breaking up, Andre.
Oh, sorry. Breaking up. Yeah. So we try to make sure that there's things that's not inappropriate for their age level there. And so we always balance out with reading time. They earn device time by with their reading time. And we use a star chart where, hey, if they do deeds that are above and beyond what the normal stars are, they can redeem those stars for, let's say, 10 or 15 minutes of device time. And so we limit it like that. And so that's how we kind of keep that balance between technology and one-on-one interaction, personal interaction with them. But I would say 90% of my interaction with them are more face-to-face in person. It doesn't involve any type of technology at all. And I'm very proud of that, yeah.
Good deal. And so with your book, did that create a new life for you as far as becoming more of a golf coach or more of a motivational coach? Or where has the creation of the book, has it led you in directions you haven't imagined?
Yes, it has. One of my goals in life is to make as much positive impact on as many people as I can. And when I was working my career as a physical therapist, the difference I could make was limited to that one patient that was in front of me at that time. Whereas with my book here, I can spread my message out far and wide to unlimited number of people at any one given moment. And so my next book that I've got coming out is a children's book. It's actually a fun book, not very serious at all. But it's a fun book for parents to sit down and read to their kids at night and good bonding time with them. And so that was one of my goals for writing it. Is just, I was inspired by my children. I do intend on, as they get older, I want to write books that are at that age level so that I can connect it with them, and then I can write a book that will allow other parents who have children that same age to connect with their children along that level. And I've also had the wonderful opportunity to make appearances in school to read my book to children from kindergarten through fourth grade is the age level, or fifth grade, I'm sorry. And so I see the smiles and the laughter coming out from these kids, and that warms my heart, that warms my soul. It really adds fuel to my drive to create and write and inspire. And my first book, The Round of Your Life, the book that we're talking about, I had a high school principal buy that book at one of my first book signings. And a few weeks later, he called me up and asked me to do a speech for his teachers, all his staff and faculty before the school season started. And I embraced that, and it was a wonderful opportunity to do a public speaking engagement and spread the message of, just a positive message to the teachers and to motivate and inspire them to teach with passion was the message that, because my book, I made references to how several teachers that I named in there made such a huge difference in my life at a time when I really needed it. So you never know what type of impact you can make on a kid. So if you're a teacher out there listening to this podcast and you see kids in school, you never know what that kid might have been through the night before. For me, my sister and I, we were kicked out by my stepfather into the cold, freezing night, almost half naked, walking a mile down the road to my uncle's house for refuge. And the next morning, just remembering going to school and trying to act normal, like nothing happened. And so you never know what that person's been through the night before. If you're a teacher, and the difference that you can make in their life, that's just showing up and being present and just supporting them, encourage them, and just telling them that, hey, their dreams can come true. They just work hard and study hard. And so that's the next phase of my life, and that's the type of impact that I'd like to make through people. So if they get a chance, my book's website is golfroundofyourlife.com. and all my media appearances are on there, all my podcast interviews and radio interviews, and hopefully, if you guys are can be kind enough, I can add that link to your show on there too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was. I think that's a good way to end it. In that, not just for teachers, just for people listening. You never know what anyone's going through when you have interaction with them. So keep that in mind, and think of Andre's story, and think of others that you heard as far as intrinsic motivation, because we are impacting people that you may have never even imagined. So it was definitely a pleasure listening to you, Andre, and talking sports and all that good stuff and keeping score. So let's definitely stay in touch, and
yes.
It was a pleasure.
Yes, and that's the coolest part of your show, that you touch on such a wide variety of topics and issues, and it's just no limit to it. So it's a really cool part of your show.
Fantastic. Well, you've just been in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza.
And I'm David.
Andre, let's stay in touch, man. Us SECers got to stick together, man.
For sure. High five for me.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Thanks again for checking out another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast. Please check us out on our website at intrinsicmotivation.life, where you can click on the Speak Pipe button and leave any suggestions for future podcasts that you'd like us to cover. Also, check us out on our social media sites. We have a YouTube channel, Facebook page, iTunes podcast, in addition to Stitcher and Google Play, all under Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. Check you out next time. Have a great day.